Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Karoline Lewis.
And me, Matt Skinner.
And me, Rolf Jacobson.
This is the podcast for the fourth Sunday of Advent, Year A, which falls on December 21, 2025. The texts are Isaiah chapter 7, 10 through 16. The psalm is Psalm 80, 1 through 7, 17 through 19. Romans 1, 1 through 7 is the second reading, and the gospel lesson is from Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 25.
It's getting real.
What, Christmas?
It's almost here.
Christmas?
Christmas is Christmas. It's practically here. Christmas is coming. It's practically here. Yeah, it's so for a lot of congregations, this will be Christmas worship.
It's close enough, isn't it?
Where
yeah,
it's like, yeah, it's close enough. Let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
But great texts, whether you're still in a very much kind of Advent-y mode or whether you're ready to talk about the nativity story, because we get Matthew's nativity here.
You do get
Which
Matthew's
is not
nativity.
Most people's favorite nativity story. Luke 2 has got the Charlie Brown Christmas endorsement.
Well, that's true, but if you add the wise men, which is not in this text, you really need the Matthew nativity story for your Christmas plays.
Good point.
So
What to
there's
set up
that.
the whole importance of dreams, perhaps. We'll get to that when we reach Epiphany,
Right.
story of the Magi. And also, we're going to get the story of the slaughter of the innocents
That'll be
in the
next,
Sunday after Christmas.
The Sunday after Christmas.
So there are some important Matthean texts coming up, if that's how you celebrate.
What I appreciate about Matthew is a good villain, Herod, and a good proof text.
The Isaiah 7.
Well,
it's really interesting, yeah.
it's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so this is Matthew's birth story, and preachers do have then an interesting opportunity to juxtapose this story with Luke's story on Christmas Eve, and the way in which the focus of this story is on Joseph, and particularly Joseph's righteousness, which is a theme in the Gospel of Matthew. Looking forward to Matthew and the year of Matthew. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. The way in which Jesus himself is presented as a teacher of all righteousness, and so it raises that theme, right, of what is righteousness going to look like. And in this case, he was a righteous man and knew how to follow the law, but at the same time, it was a situation where mercy was necessary. And so it just kind of raises that that even in the question of what righteousness is, and that God's righteousness is going to take on perhaps a different form in this case when we think about the birth of Jesus and what Jesus' life will look like and ministry will look like.
The question of whether Joseph makes a righteous choice here in terms of his original plan is an interesting one. There's maybe a reminder that there really are no good options for him and for Mary both,
right?
Given that culture, given some of the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Like doing this quietly might save Joseph from shame and dishonor. It might shield Mary from some of that, but probably not all of it. So that's interesting. And so the only real solution that comes through in the end is what finally happens, where God directs him to take Mary as his wife, as was the plan, which is interesting that sometimes righteousness can get you only so far in this world, right? There's sometimes there are choices to be made that have no easy, good, win-win-win solutions, it seems.
Well, and that's important.
Especially when God gets your fiancée pregnant without letting you know in advance.
There's that. Yeah. Well, that's an important point, too, in that Joseph knows what righteousness is and is described as such, but then that interruption, right, or that direction from God moves him in a different direction. And so we do have that, as I said earlier, we have this idea of, okay, what was righteousness, or how was righteousness perceived through Joseph's eyes, and then now God is working out righteousness in a different kind of way, and inviting us to think about that. And then, of course, also the appearance of God, that God interjects, God intercedes, and God directs this. And so that theme as well of sort of the way Jesus' origin, because that's the word that Matthew used, the way Jesus' origin comes about is God-driven, right?
Yes, God initiated, I would say, but then human response also plays a part in this. And so if Joseph has a righteousness on display here, I think it shows up in verse 24, where it says he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, that it's obedience.
Yeah, obedience.
To what God calls him to do, even though it might sound a little crazy in the dream, even though it might sound still perhaps opening him up to his own shame, or at least whispers in the community, all those types of things. So he acts obediently. In some ways, this is not the same thing, but it's similar to in Luke 1 at the Annunciation, where Mary says, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord, the slave of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word," where Mary gives her consent. Here you've got Joseph taking an obedient move that makes the plan possible, because without Joseph, Jesus loses his Davidic lineage. And again, the fact that Joseph names Jesus sounds a little weird in verse 25. Would Mary not have a voice in this? I think is a sign that Joseph now considers Jesus his own son. In other words, he has adopted him or taken him on fully, which again ensures the Davidic lineage, which is so important in Matthew's gospel.
And how that becomes even another act of righteousness, or obedience. Yeah.
Yeah, obedience, and not even really knowing where it's going. All he's told is, well, name him Jesus, the child is from the Holy Spirit, and he will save his people from their sins. That's good, but there's a lot of missing information there that I would have had I been Joseph. And that's what obedience is sometimes, right? Is taking steps when you don't really know where the second and third or fourth step are going to take you.
I want to go back to a couple of things you already said, especially the question, what is righteousness? That, Joseph being a righteous man. So sometimes, actually a lot of times in the world, because it's fallen, there's no good choice for the righteous. That is, Joseph's dilemma. So if he puts aside Mary quietly, not wanting to expose her to public disgrace, there's still some sort of putting aside that happens. That's not good. Yeah. On the other hand, based on following the law as it's come down to him, before he gets the information that the child's God's, that this has been a case of, I don't know, we're not given insight to what aspect of the breaking of the commandment has bothered him that he feels the need to do this. But I do think that the law and being righteous sometimes leaves a person with less than great options, which is finally, I think, why God's intervention in the form of Jesus in our lives is, the thing that matters most.
When you said that too, Rolf, I was thinking that, that righteousness being righteous, following righteousness doesn't always lead to easy choices, right? Or what is the best choice. And I think, and you were talking about obedience, Matt, in terms of really how that is in part characteristic of righteousness. But it's also, I think there's also an element of trust here, of trust in God's righteousness, which is a main characteristic of who God is, right? And how God has demonstrated God's own righteousness that Joseph has seen and witnessed his entire life. And so there's this sense of, I know what's righteous, I know what that looks like, but here in this moment, I also know God's righteousness, and I'm going to trust that.
I was going to say as well, we should probably clear up that it's not the case that if Joseph had dismissed her publicly that she's going to get stoned to death or something like that. You sometimes hear people say, well, the law commands this for adultery. It doesn't mean that everybody's doing that, right? We don't have records of that actually being carried out in that way. Now, yes, there probably would have been all sorts of social and other kinds of repercussions for Mary in a small town and in that culture, but it's not that Joseph is choosing between the mercy of a lawless gospel versus the severity of a legal code that's unbending or something like that.
Can I just point out So they're not married yet. But this would still be considered adultery because adultery is technically when a married person has sex with someone who's not their spouse. Adultery is not premarital sex.
Uh-huh.
So the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, is not a commandment against premarital sex. And the law deals differently with unmarried people that have sex with each other than it does with married. So, I mean, I don't think people know. And you're probably not going to go into that in a sermon, although I do think it's really important to clarify because so many people assume that thou shalt not commit adultery means thou shalt not have premarital sex.
Suddenly this podcast got a lot more interesting.
Ooh,
Having
yeah.
recently written a chapter on this for my book on the
For your
Ten
book
Commandments.
on the Ten
There you
Commandments.
go.
So you know a
People
few
are-
In
things
about
about
a year.
Yeah, you know a few things about
The
Ten
commandments. Don't say I know a few things about adultery.
I did
please.
notice I didn't say that.
I do.
Yeah,
I noticed.
yeah.
I appreciated that
Yeah.
very much of you.
The betrothal, sorry, if we're doing like random historical facts, right? The betrothal is also a big deal because
Correct.
potentially money has been exchanged or crops or
Right. There's
livestock.
been an agreement. Agreement has
Family
been
agreements
made.
have
Yes.
been made that now need to be backed out of, which is also significant. This affects more than just the two of them. It affects their families potentially.
And potentially, and their community.
They've exchanged credit card numbers.
Yeah. They might even have a
Yes.
shared bank
They might even
account.
have the security code.
Yeah.
And people have already bought things off the registry.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Well, and then we need to move on, but I have one more nugget. One more little nugget here. And that is, of course, the name Emmanuel. We know the name Jesus, but the name Emmanuel, which we've talked about before, fast forward, foreshadows the promise of the Great Commission. I will be with you always to the end of the age in Matthew, all that kind of thing. But here, I love verse 23, which means God is with us. And that it's such a simple thing, but that is the promise of Christmas, not just that God came to us, right? That God became past tense in Jesus, but that God is with us. And so that was something I thought about for a Christmas sermon or a fourth Sunday of Advent sermon, is that it's a promise of God's presence always, it's not just an historical moment in time. That's it. Now we can move on.
Yeah, there's tons we can say about why is Isaiah 7 quoted here and quoted the way it is. And
Why don't we talk
we're
about
going to
that?
move to Isaiah now. But,
Yeah.
but I think part of it is, I think Matthew's really eager to get that name Emmanuel out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As a way of describing what's happening here. This larger movement of God, right?
That's worth pursuing why Matthew wants to include this, because on a literal level, it makes zero sense. I say this every 3 years, every 4 years in their Narrative Lectionary podcast. So it's, I know you are sick of it. However, notice that on a literal level. So the story in Isaiah, if you go back to the story in Isaiah, it says this: the young woman shall conceive and bear a son, and interesting, his name shall be Emmanuel, which means, so this would have been probably about 732 years before Jesus or so was born, which means that a child was born about 732 in Jerusalem, and his name was Emmanuel. So it makes no sense on a literal level that 700 years later, a baby was named Jesus to fulfill the prophecy that a boy would be named Emmanuel, right? Just the jarring. It's like, wait, I thought they named him Jesus. They did, because the point is, it's the meaning of the name now is what's being fulfilled, not just the birth of a child. So the most obvious, if you go back to Isaiah, so when the prophet confronts King Ahaz, Ahaz is the southern kingdom at the time is being invaded by an alliance of the northern kingdom of Israel and Damascus, its non-Yahweh worshiping neighbor. Their goal is to remove Ahaz as king because he won't join their rebellion against Assyria. I'm going to get these Chaldeans right one of these times in this podcast. They've rebelled against Assyria, and by the time they're wagering that by the time the Assyrians can get there, probably it's Sargon, by the time he can get over there with his chariots, that they can kill Ahaz, replace him with a puppet, and then get the troops from Judah to join in. And so the king is hiding. And so the prophet goes and confronts him and says, you can trust God. God's going to protect the city. In fact, by the time that woman's baby, points to a pregnant woman, meaning the woman is most likely either the prophetess, his wife, who we know they name other kids with symbolic names, or it's the queen, the king's wife or consort. It's most likely one of the two, but it makes sense that it's his own kid because prophets name their own kids. They don't name royal children. And so in that day, the promise is God is with the city and will protect it from this invading army. And so what Matthew is saying is 800 years later, now God is with us in an exponentially more powerful way. So long story longer.
Well, and I think also the commentary really helps with that too, by Corinne Carvalho, in what you just said, and putting Isaiah into that historical context, I think is important.
Which is also a great Christmas sermon to really pull people into that 8th century reality, right? That here, BCE reality, that here's a time when everything looks bleak, right? Like nobody is expecting Jerusalem to survive what they think is coming or they know is coming. And you've got somebody whose faith is so profound, whether it's the prophet or anybody, that it's a kind of rebuke to the king's own cowardliness, right? That why would somebody name their kid God is with us when trouble is at the door? And in a way, of course, this is not like you said, Rolf, this is not a fulfillment of a future-looking prophecy, the way in which it somehow would be disconnected from Isaiah's own context.
Right.
But it becomes new in this new way, right? Whereas, well, for Joseph, like, okay, this child is a sign of God's provision, of God's presence, of God's initiative. And that's odd in any circumstance.
Yeah.
But especially in Joseph and Mary's circumstances.
Israel kept the prophecies of prophets who spoke primarily to their own day. So Isaiah is speaking to a war crisis in his own time. The commentary on the website mentions Sennacherib's invasion. Just to clarify, it's not the same invasion. Sennacherib invades about 30 years later or more. So it's the same dynasty. It's the same Assyrian empire. But then Israel kept the words of the prophets because they believed if God spoke through these people once, God will speak through these same exact words that we've now recorded again. And so, and they did experience over and over that God continued to speak through the words that were written down. And so when Matthew's use of the prophecy, I think, is 100% legitimate, especially according to the theological understandings of Israel.
Very in line for first century Judaism in terms of the kind of interpretation that's going on there.
That's true too.
Yeah.
But it's not just first century. I mean, it goes back. Why did they save these words?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they saved them because God spoke through Isaiah, and we think God will speak again through these words.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of like Psalm 80, wouldn't you say?
Karoline, first of all, it's Advent. So sing Advent songs or Christmas carols if that's your dig. It's mine. Otherwise, for pretty much, unless you're going to use it liturgically, especially the refrain, restore us, O God, let your face shine on us that we may be saved.
Yeah, I like that line.
Right. I mean,
I would use that line somehow.
Yeah, it's used twice
That's about
here.
it.
But otherwise, this the psalm, I'm not paying too much of attention to it this week.
Yeah, you could. It would be a lovely refrain type of thing in the prayers of the day.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Hence liturgically.
The response.
Yeah.
Hence liturgically. But
there are some communities where this is a very fitting psalm.
Yes.
Yeah.
For the days before Christmas that are undergoing all kinds of turmoil. So
absolutely.
This isn't to say that the rest of the psalm is useless for this time of year.
No. But
that's a good point. I mean, look, it's the prayer of a community that's longing for deliverance. And so it's a great response to the first lesson. It's a great response to think about what Israel or the people, the Jewish people in the first century might have been experiencing under Rome, and the kind of prayers they might have been praying.
Right. Mm-hmm. If you do a Blue Christmas service, you might have already done that, but there are ways in which something like this could fit in other parts of the If people don't know what that is, it's some kind of a service for people experiencing loss or loneliness during the holidays.
Isn't that where we sing a lot of Elvis? Presley, not Costello.
I know. Yeah. I hope not.
Okay, fine.
That's
I had to find myself for singing.
Is there a singing jar?
Yeah.
I didn't sing O Come, Emmanuel.
That's because I would have found you.
Yeah, I know. All right, Romans 1:1-7, the salutation.
Well, what is the gospel
I would love
of God?
to preach this on another week.
On another week.
But that's a good question. What is the gospel of God?
People who want
which
to...
he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, by the way. Says so right there.
The three of us tend to be more one text at a time kinds of preachers.
Yeah,
but some people aren't, and some people can't be that. And so this is something you might weave into your interpretation of Matthew 1 as a way of talking about what is Joseph making possible through his simple obedience of not abandoning Mary. What is Mary making possible through her experience, which is not narrated in Matthew, and what is God initiating? And so for Paul, the gospel of God is first and foremost not a message. It's a divine action.
And it's divine presence.
Well, there you go. God is with us. So that's worth talking about. Again, the descent from David is, again, really important in Matthew. It's important, I think, in Matthew 1 that we just read. That,
it's important through the whole New Testament.
Well, there's that, yeah. And to kind of help people get a sense for why that matters. Again, that's not for every congregation on December 21st, but it's for some.
And that's a way you also could bring in how Matthew begins his gospel with the genealogy of Jesus. Again, thinking about how we are in the year of Matthew. What is that unique portrait of Jesus that Matthew is going to present? And so beginning his gospel with the genesis, right, of Jesus, the origin of Jesus. And so tying this text descending from David into that.
Well, in what way is it a story of faithful obedience? There's some stories of the opposite in Matthew's genealogy. But there's also embedded in that are stories of some surprising faithfully obedient people like Ruth and like Tamar and others. So that line here in verse 5 of Romans 1, the obedience of faith or faithful obedience is maybe an interesting topic as well. What kind of obedience does Christmas call for?
Yeah, that's an interesting angle would be to include the genealogy in the readings, or at least to go back
Poor
to it.
Reader. Whoever's reading that, I feel bad.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Go ahead.
But go back to it, definitely.
But go back to it, because if somebody is interested in the theme of the righteousness, then you get the story of Tamar, whom Judah says she is more righteous than I, and you get the story of Rahab, who does prove righteous in terms of how she treats the spies and the Israelites, and I think the same would be true. I think of Bathsheba, and Ruth, and so Ruth's definitely righteous in the book of Ruth, and so the righteousness there that those women who under some narrow misinterpretations of the law might have been seen as unrighteous are seen as righteous. And therefore, I mean, it really does shed light on who Mary is as the mother of God. You mentioned the origin a minute ago. This is the origin story of the birth of Jesus, but of course not the origin of the Christ. Just all of those emails send to Karoline if you're getting ready to object about the Jesus, the Christ.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Don't worry, John 1 is coming in a couple of days. Hold on, got to be patient in Advent.
Sermon Brainwave is a production of Working Preacher from Luther Seminary. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers since 2007 and worldwide. Find episodes, commentaries, and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave, and subscribe to Working Preacher's monthly newsletter for Revised Common Lectionary preachers by clicking on subscribe in the website footer. Please rate, review, and comment on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for joining us.